Hello, friends. Helen McCrane here. And tonight, I bring you Edgar Allan Poe. The very mention of his name conjures in our minds pictures of premature burials and black cats walled up in dank cellars and scenes of incipient madness. But that's not all Mrs. Poe's little boy Eddie wrote about, you know. Good grief, no. Why, in the annals of short story writing, the man wrote some of the funniest tales going. So just kick back and relax and listen, and I'll bet the devil my head you are gonna love this Edgar Allan Poe. You may go now. Thank you. Thank you very much. I really would rather you weren't looking over my shoulder while I'm reading. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye. Get out. Ghosts. Shh. There is no just cause for the charge brought against me by certain ignoramuses that I have never written a moral tale, or in more precise words, a tale with a moral. By way of mitigating these accusations against me, I offer the sad history appended, a history about whose obvious moral there can be no question whatever, since he who runs may read it in the large capitals which form the title of the tale. It is not my design to vituperate my deceased friend Toby Dammit. He was a sad dog, it is true, and a dog's death it was that he died, but he himself is not to blame for his vices. They grew out of a personal defect in his mother. She did her best in the way of flogging him while a child, for duties to her well-regulated mind were always pleasures, and children, like tough steaks, are invariably the better for beating. But, poor woman, she had the misfortune to be left-handed, and a child flogged left-handedly had better be left unflogged. The world revolves from right to left, and it will not do to whip a child from left to right. If each blow in the proper direction drives an evil propensity out, it follows that every thump in the opposite one knocks its quota of wickedness in. I was often present at Toby's chastisements, and even by the way in which he kicked, I could perceive that he was getting worse and worse every day. At last I saw through the tears in my eyes that there was no hope of the villain at all, and one day I could stand it no longer, but went down upon my knees forthwith, and uplifting my voice, made prophecy of his ruin. Well, the fact is that his precocity in vice was awful. At 5 months of age, he used to get into such passions that he was unable to articulate. At 6 months, I caught him gnawing a pack of cards. At 7 months, he was in the constant habit of catching and kissing the female babies. At 8 months, he peremptorily refused to put his signature on the temperance pledge. Thus he went on, increasing in iniquity month after month, until, at the close of the first year, he not only insisted upon wearing mustaches, but had contracted a propensity for cursing and swearing, and for backing his assertions by bets. Through this latter, most ungentlemanly practice, the ruin which I had predicted to Toby Dammit overtook him at last. The fashion had grown with his growth and strengthened with his strength, so that when he came to be a man, he could scarcely utter a sentence without interlarding it with a proposition to gamble. Well, not that he ever actually laid wagers, no. I will do my friend the justice to say that he would as soon have laid eggs. Now, with him the thing was a mere formula, nothing more. His expressions on this head had no meaning attached to them whatever. They were simple, well, if not altogether innocent, expletives, imaginative phrases wherewith to round off a sentence. When he said, "I bet you so-and-so," nobody ever thought of taking him up. But still I could not help thinking that it my duty to put him down. The habit was an immoral one, and so I told him. It was a vulgar one, and this I begged him to believe. It was discountenanced by society. Here I said nothing but the truth. It was forbidden by act of Congress. Though here I had not the slightest intention of telling a lie. I remonstrated, but to no purpose. I demonstrated, in vain. I entreated, he smiled. I implored, he laughed. I preached, he sneered. I threatened, he swore. I kicked him, he called for the police. I pulled his nose, he blew it, and offered to bet the devil his head that I would not venture to try that experiment again. Poverty was another vice which the peculiar physical deficiency of Dammit's mother had entailed upon her son. He was detestably poor, and this was the reason, no doubt, that his expletive expressions about betting seldom took a pecuniary turn. Now, I will not be bound to say that I ever heard him make use of such a figure of speech as, "I'll bet you $1. It was usually, "I'll bet you what you please," or "I'll bet you what you dare," or "I'll bet you a trifle," or else, more significantly still, "I'll bet the devil my head." This latter form seemed to please him best, perhaps because it involved the least risk, for Dammit had become excessively parsimonious. Had anyone taken him up, his head was small, and thus his loss would have been small too. But these are my own reflections, and I am by no means sure I am right in attributing them to him. At all events, the phrase in question grew daily in favor, notwithstanding the gross impropriety of a man betting his brains like banknotes. But this was a point which my friend's perversity of disposition would not permit him to comprehend. In the end, he abandoned all other forms of wager and gave himself up to, "I'll bet the devil my head," with a pertinacity and exclusiveness of devotion that displeased not less than surprised me. I'm always displeased by circumstances for which I cannot account. Mysteries force a man to think, and so to injure his health. The truth is, there was something in the air with which Mr. Dammit was wont to give utterance to his offensive expressions, something in his manner of enunciation, which at first interested and afterwards made me very uneasy. Something which, for want of a more definite term at present, I must be permitted to call weird, but which Mr. Coleridge would have called mystical, Mr. Kant pantheistical, Mr. Carlyle twistical, and Mr. Emerson hyperquisitistical. I began not to like it at all. Mr. Dammit's soul was in a perilous state. I resolved to bring all my eloquence into play to save it. I vowed to serve him as St. Patrick in the Irish Chronicle is said to have served the toad. That is to say, to awaken him to a sense of his situation. I addressed myself to the task forthwith. Once more I betook myself to remonstrance. Again I collected my energies for a final attempt at expostulation. When I had made an end of my lecture, Mr. Dammit indulged himself in some very equivocal behavior. For some moments he remained silent, merely looking at me inquisitively in the face. But presently he threw his head to one side and elevated his eyebrows to a great extent. Then he spread out the palms of his hands and shrugged up his shoulders. Then he winked with the right eye, and then he repeated the operation with the left. Then he shut them both up very tight, and then he opened them both so very wide that I became seriously alarmed for the consequences. Then, applying his thumb to his nose, he thought proper to make an indescribable movement with the rest of his fingers. Finally, setting his arms akimbo, he condescended to reply. I can call to mind only the beads of his discourse. He would be obliged to me if I would hold my tongue. He wished none of my advice. He despised all my insinuations. He was old enough to take care of himself. Did I still think him baby, damn it? Did I mean to say things against his character? Did I intend to insult him? Was I a fool? Was my maternal parent aware, in a word, of my absence from the domiciliary residence? He would put this latter question to me as to a man of veracity, and he would bind himself to abide by my answer. Once more, he would demand explicitly if my mother knew that I was out. My confusion, he said, betrayed me, and he would be willing to bet the devil his head that she did not. Dammit did not pause for my rejoinder. Turning upon his heels, he left my presence with undignified precipitation. It was well for him that he did so. My feelings had been wounded. Even my anger had been aroused. And for once I would have taken him up upon his insulting wager. I would have won for the arch enemy, Mr. Dammit's little head. For the fact is, my mamma was very well aware of my merely temporary absence from home. It was in pursuance of my duty that I had been insulted, and I bore the insult like a man. It now seemed to me, however, that I had done all that could be required of me in the case of this miserable individual, and I resolved to trouble him no more with my counsel, but to leave him to his conscience and himself. But although I forbore to intrude with my advice, I could not bring myself to give up his society altogether. I even went so far as to humor some of his less reprehensible propensities, and there were times when I found myself lauding his wicked jokes, as epicures do with mustard, with tears in my eyes. So profoundly did it grieve me to hear his evil talk. One fine day, having strolled out together arm in arm, our route led us in the direction of a river. There was a bridge, and we resolved to cross it. It was roofed over by way of protection from the weather, and the archway, having but few windows, was thus very uncomfortably dark. As we entered the passage, the contrast between the external glare and the interior gloom struck heavily upon my spirits. Not so upon those of the unhappy Dammit, who offered to bet the devil his head that I was somewhat apprehensive. He seemed to be in an unusually good humor. He was excessively lively, so much so that I entertained I know not what of uneasy suspicion. It is not impossible that he was affected with the transcendentals. Now, I am not well enough versed, however, in the diagnosis of this disease to speak with decision upon the point. I suggest the idea, nevertheless, because of a certain species of austere Merry Andrewism which seemed to beset my poor friend and caused him to make himself quite a tomfool. Nothing would serve him but wriggling and skipping about under and over every little thing that came in his way, now shouting out and now lisping out all manner of odd little and big words, yet preserving the gravest face in the world all the time. I really could not make up my mind whether to kick him or pity him. At length, having passed nearly across the bridge, we approached the termination of the footpath, when our progress was impeded by a turnstile of some height. Through this I made my way quietly, pushing it round as usual, but this turn would not serve the turn of Mr. Dammit. He insisted upon leaping the stile, and said he could cut a pigeon wing over it in the air. Now this, conscientiously speaking, I did not think he could. The best pigeon-winger over all kinds of style was my friend Mr. Carlyle, and as I knew he could not do it, I would not believe that it could be done by Toby Dammit. I therefore told him in so many words that he was a braggadocio, and could not do what he said. And for this I had reason to be sorry afterwards, for he straightway offered to bet the devil his head that he could. I was about to reply, notwithstanding my previous resolutions, with some remonstrance against his impiety, when I heard, close at my elbow, a slight cough, which sounded very much like the ejaculation, "Ahem." I started and looked about me in surprise. My glance fell at length into a nook of the framework of the bridge, and upon the figure of a little lame old gentleman of venerable aspect. Nothing could be more reverend than his whole appearance, for he not only had on a full suit of black, but his shirt was perfectly clean, and the collar turned very neatly down over his white cravat, while his hair was parted in front like a girl's. His hands were clasped pensively together over his stomach, and his two eyes were carefully rolled up into the top of his head. Upon observing him more closely, I perceived that he wore a black silk apron over his small clothes, and this was a thing which I thought very odd. Before I had time to make any remark, however, upon so singular a circumstance, he interrupted me with a second To this observation I was not immediately prepared to reply. The fact is, remarks of this laconic nature are nearly unanswerable. I am not ashamed to say, therefore, that I turned to Mr. Dammit for assistance. "Dammit," said I, "what are you about? Don't you hear? The gentleman says ahem." I looked sternly at my friend, while I thus addressed him, for to say the truth, I felt particularly puzzled, and when a man is particularly puzzled, he must knit his brows and look savage, or else he is pretty sure to look a fool. "Dammit," I observed, although this sounded very much like an oath, than which nothing was further from my thoughts. "Dammit," I suggested, "the gentleman says ahem." I do not attempt to defend my remark on the score of profundity. I did not think it profound myself, but I have noticed that the effect of our speeches is not always proportionate with their importance in our own eyes, and if I had shot Mr. D through and through with a cannon, or knocked him in the head with the poets and poetry of America, he could hardly have been more discomfited than when I addressed him with those simple words, "Dammit, what are you about? Don't you hear? The gentleman says ahem." "You don't say so," gasped he at length, after turning more colors than a pirate runs up one after the other when chased by a man-of-war. "Are you quite sure he said that?" "Well, at all events, I'm in for it now, and may as well put a bold face upon the matter. Here goes, then. Ahem." At this, the little old gentleman seemed pleased. God only knows why. He left his station at the nook of the bridge, limped forward with a gracious air, took Dammit by the hand and shook it cordially, looking all the while straight up in his face with an air of the most unadulterated benignity which it is is possible for the mind of man to imagine. "I'm quite sure you will win it, Dammit," said he with the frankest of all smiles. "But we are obliged to have a trial, you know, for the sake of form."
"Ahem,"
replied my friend, taking off his coat with a deep sigh, and tying a pocket handkerchief around his waist, and producing an unaccountable alteration in his countenance by twisting up his eyes and bringing down the corners of his mouth.
"Ahem,"
And
"ahem,"
said he again, after a pause, and not another word more than "ahem" did I ever know him to say after that. "Aha!" thought I, without expressing myself aloud. "This is quite possibly a remarkable silence on the part of Toby Dammit, and is no doubt a consequence of his verbosity upon a previous occasion. One extreme induces another. I wonder if he has forgotten the many unanswerable questions which he propounded to me so fluently on the day I gave him my last lecture. At all events, he's cured of the transcendentals."
"Ahem,"
here replied Toby, just as if he had been reading my thoughts, and looking like a very old sheep in a reverie. The old gentleman took him by the arm and led him into the shade of the bridge, a few paces back from the turnstile. "My good fellow," said he, "I make it a point of conscience to allow you this much run. Now you wait here till I take my place by the stile, so that I may see whether you go over it handsomely and transcendentally, and don't omit any flourishes of the pigeon wing. A mere form, you know. I will say 1, 2, 3, and away. Now mind you, start at the word away." Here he took his position by the stile and paused a moment as if in profound reflection, then looked up and, I thought, smiled very slightly. Then, tightening the strings of his apron, then took a long look at Dammit, and finally gave the word as agreed upon. 1, 2, 3, and away! The bridge, as I say, was arched and covered in, and there was a most uncomfortable echo about it at all times, the echo of which I never before so particularly observed. Punctually at the word away, my poor friend set off in a strong gallop. The stile was not very high, nor yet very low, but upon the whole I made sure that he would clear it. And then, what if he did not? Oh, that was the question. What if he did not? What right, said I, had the old gentleman to make any other gentleman jump? I mean, who is he? If he asks me to jump, I won't do it, and that's flat. I don't care who the devil he is. But what I said, or what I thought, or what I heard, occupied only an instant. In less than 5 seconds from his starting, my poor Toby had taken the leap. I saw him run nimbly and spring grandly from the floor of the bridge, cutting the most awful flourishes with his legs as he went up. I saw him high in the air, pigeon-winging it to admiration just over the top of the stile. And of course I thought it an unusually singular thing that he did not continue to go over. But the whole leap was the affair of a moment, and before I had a chance to make any profound reflections, down came Mr. Dammit on the flat of his back, on the same side of the stile from which he had started. At the same instant, I saw the old gentleman limping off at the top of his speed, having caught and wrapped up in his apron something that fell heavily into it from the darkness of the arch over the turnstile. At all of this I was much astonished, but I had no leisure to think, for Dammit lay particularly still, and I concluded that his feelings had been hurt, and that he stood in need of my assistance. I hurried up to him and found that he had received what might be termed a serious injury. The truth is, he'd been deprived of his head, which, after a close search, I could not find anywhere. So I determined to take him home and send for the homeopathists. In the meantime, a thought struck me, and I threw open an adjacent window of the bridge, when the sad truth flashed upon me at once. About 5 feet just above the top of the turnstile and crossing the arch of the footpath so as to constitute a brace, there extended a flat iron bar, lying with its breadth horizontally and forming one of a series that served to strengthen the structure throughout its extent. With the edge of this brace it appeared evident that the neck of my unfortunate friend had come precisely in contact. He did not long survive his terrible loss. The homeopathists did not give him little enough physic, and what little they did give him he hesitated to take. So, in the end, he grew worse, and at length died. A lesson to all riotous livers. I bedewed his grave with my tears, worked a bar sinister on his family escutcheon, and for the general expenses of his funeral sent in my very moderate bill to the transcendentalists. The scoundrels refused to pay it. So I had Mr. Dammit dug up at once and sold him for dog meat.